Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with a little Thursday night football preview for tonight's matchup between the Jets and the Browns. And while it might not be a banger of a matchup, I mean, it's the Jets, the Browns, a low scoring, low total kind of game. We still got some bets we can place, some GPPs that have got our names on it, and some prop slips we can go out there and add to the bankroll as well. So not all is lost. Let's go ahead, talk about some of the DFS and prop action tonight, and make sure that you're all ready to go for all of your exposure. So for DFS, we'll talk about some of the strategy you might want to consider before building those lineups. And then over there for props, we'll go through some of my top underdog and price pick spots that you can go out there and add to your slips. So a lot to get into here, guys. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. Everyone and anyone tonight is going to play running backs and defenses. When you have two top tier elite level defenses out there playing, also two offenses that are dealing with their own struggles, you're going to see a lot of people flock to the same kind of lineups. And if anyone's going to trust an offense over the other, right, everyone's fallen in love with Joe Flacco. So if you're going to see anything that's maybe not as defensive based, it's going to be a Flacco stack with Cooper, maybe Njoku thrown in. And people are going to have a hard time getting creative tonight. But anytime you see one of those low totals, right, mid 30s like we have in this matchup, you want to try and think outside the box. Maybe it's the Jets offense being a little bit more efficient than we expect. Perhaps it's some of the wide receivers just going off by themselves. There are a few ways that you can get to this kind of game. Just think a little bit differently and get infinite leverage to the field. And I guess we'll start off with what to avoid, right? What is going to be that mega chalk tonight? And just because it's chalk doesn't mean that it's going to hit or miss out there for that matter. But the important part is from the game theory angle, right? For our large field contest, we don't want to be building the same kind of lineups as everyone else, because when our script, our scenario goes out there and actually hits, we want to make sure that we're in the minority of lineups rather than playing against 30 to 50,000 other entries. And tonight, like I mentioned, it's more of that defensive approach. So whether it's a Breece Hall out there getting to either running back on the Browns side, I can see a lot of people play Jerome Ford, potentially even at the captain spot, and you can throw a Kareem Hunt in there as well. We'll talk about Hunt later. He's actually one of my favorite plays on the slate. But if your lineup's going to start off with the Hall and say Jerome Ford, throw in both or even just one of the two defenses right there, you're already going to be in that same kind of script as a majority of the field. So whether you're favoring the Browns, the Jets in that kind of script, you're probably going to be a little bit chalky if you build like that. The other script we mentioned was the Joe Flacco-led Browns offense. They, of course, are about a touchdown favorite tonight. So if anyone's going to be favored over the other, right, have slightly higher ownership than the other team, the Browns are going to be the team with the inflated numbers. And then Joe Flacco, you have the 200-plus yard receiver last week with Amari Cooper. You get the Njoku, he's been on an absolute tear. Elijah Moore's posted some okay numbers himself. That kind of stack, maybe buying it back with the Breece Hall, is also going to be extremely popular. On top of Breece Hall just getting a boost because of the low scoring script, he also saw 16 targets last week. So as a potential buyback, even in a 4-2 or 5-1 Browns onslaught, you could see Breece Hall as that one buyback. So if you're going to do anything to get different, I think that Garrett Wilson, of all players, especially if you're looking for a spend-up option, is probably the lowest owned of the bunch. And on top of that, you have a player that I think has some of the highest upside on the slate. So just to give you an idea with Garrett Wilson, he's had games of 14, 16, and 18 targets this year. So obviously Breece Hall 16 last week, which did lead the entire NFL. Pretty wild right there for somebody out of the backfield to lead the league and targets. But Garrett Wilson has done that himself, right? He's had games of 8, 9 catches this year, which in a PPR heavy site like we have here with Draftkings, some of the other larger fantasy sites, that is going to be huge. But on top of that, he's had multiple touchdown games. He's gone out there, roasted teams for 100 plus receiving yards, and I know that the Browns defense is stingy, right? One of the better units, particularly with the corners and secondary of the entire NFL. But Garrett Wilson can travel around, right? He has positional flexibility. He can play out of the slot. He can play on both sides on the outside. So, but just because they have a few star players on the defense doesn't mean that somebody like Garrett Wilson is going to get completely shut down. Now, he might, right? But when he's the lowest owned option of all these guys up top, I think that that's a mistake. So if you're going to try and get a little bit different, a little bit creative on this sort of slate, take the wide receivers for the Jets, right? It could be a Garrett Wilson. You could go down here. Now, you probably want to play Conklin at captain, but you use Conklin, who's right around 28% owned. That's a little bit of leverage there. The players you want to avoid in this mid-tier are the Browns defense, right? 50% owned. If you're looking to get different, right? Jerome Ford, David Njoku, I think there's a time and place to get to both, but they aren't for differentiation, right? They are not going to get your lineup different. So if you're trying to be more creative, maybe don't take them as your middle tier options. In terms of your guys down low, right? Your value options, Jets defense is getting some attention, right? Not a surprise with that low scoring script. The kicker is getting some attention, especially Riley Patterson. He'll be starting for the Browns this week. A few other projection sources out there, I have to say, still have Dustin Hopkins playing. He's out for a couple weeks, so it will be Riley Patterson. He's the kicker that the Browns ended up picking up. So he'll probably get a bunch of exposure by the time we get to lock there. If you want to get a little different, you take a chance on one of these wide receivers. I think Xavier Gibson, right, wide receiver for the Jets, has a lot of setup plays for him, kind of like a Tyreek Hill, kind of like a Deebo Samuel. He'll take, carries out of the backfield, a lot of screen passes for an Xavier Gibson, and as their punt and kick returner, it makes a lot of sense that they want to get the ball in his hands, right? He's an explosive player, somebody that can turn a small little gain into a splash play in a moment, and on this kind of slate, are the guys that are underutilized. Even a Cedric Tillman, because he's over there on the Brown side, I have projected for higher ownership. But if you look at their ceiling performances, Gibson has nearly double the ceiling of a Cedric Tillman. I mean, Tillman's the number 3 wide receiver for Cleveland, doesn't even play all that many snaps. Gibson plays more and also has more explosive big play ability. The only reason that somebody like Tillman projects for higher points and higher ownership than what you have with the, Xavier Gibson side is because they're the favorite here, right? A lot of people want to stack up that Brown side. So just a quick way to get different is maybe to even play a 3-3, right? And take a chance on a few of these cheaper Jets wide receivers. You can throw Allen Lazard into that conversation. Is still questionable as of right now, so you have to make sure he's actually suiting it up for tonight. And then outside of that, that's probably as low as I'd be willing to go. I'm playing Jordan Atkins in a few lineups. He's the backup tight end out there for Cleveland. But in terms of getting different, right, taking just, some of these guys that are actually costing 2-3K, I think that these Jets wide receivers are probably my preferred out of the bunch there. So let's go back up top. Let's talk player by player, go through some of the other things you might want to keep an eye on for tonight. And with Amari Cooper, it comes down to health. And I actually think this questionable tag might help us out a little bit. He's technically questionable with a heel injury. That's the report we got from the team. But I don't think he's actually injured. Last week had over 200 receiving yards. And the reason why I say I don't think he's injured, right? I'm not Nostradamus. I don't just claim to have info I don't. The guy went back into the game, right? The game was like a 4-touchdown game in the fourth quarter just so that he could break the team record for receiving yards. You don't do that with somebody that's actually injured, right? He came out of the game. He looked a little bit gimpy after a few hits, as you'll have happen, right? When you have all those touches, 250 plus receiving yards. But he went back into the game, right? You don't do that with somebody, especially a star player like Cooper, that's injured. So I know he's technically questionable. A lot of that's because they probably want to give him a little bit rest heading into this game. Unless we get some report before lock from a beat reporter saying that Cooper doesn't look 100%, I'm treating him like he is 100%. And because he has that Q tag over there on Draftkings as well, maybe he'll come in at slightly lower ownership than he should. So at 56 combined percent ownership, right, I think he should be your highest owned player on the slate. Should probably be closer to like 65, maybe even 70% combined ownership between the flex and the captain spot. And because of that questionable tag, because of that report that came out, and it didn't come out until yesterday night, he was going to be like 65, 70% owned. So if this ends up holding, if we end up getting a lower ownership number of Cooper than we should, he's going to be one of my favorite plays on the slate, right? Even as a chalky piece of that Browns offense, like, that's just too low. He's lower owned than he should be, so you definitely want to get over the field there. Breece Hall, we already mentioned that he has some upside, particularly even in buybacks because of all the targets he got, but don't expect him to get 16 targets again, right? More realistically, he might get somewhere around 5-6 targets, which at that kind of price tag, as long as he's going out there, maybe getting 1 touchdown tonight, getting around 100 scrimmage yards, that would be his way to the optimal lineup. So I understand that the running backs are going to be a little bit chalky, but I also also understand why they're chalky. The important part is if you're going to play both of these running backs, right, get yourself into more of that chalky game script. Let's say playing a Hall, one of the two Cleveland running backs, then you're going to have to throw in a dart play, right? And by a dart play, it's the Gibsons, it's the Allen Lazards that we were mentioning before. You're going to have to take a shot at some point. And a player that I really like taking a shot on, and we're just going to skip around here because I need to mention it with Kareem Hunt. He's probably my favorite play on the slate, Kareem Hunt. He's $5,200. He has 8 touchdowns on the year. He's clearly the number 2 running back right behind a Jerome Ford out there. But when they get into a specific game script, and by specific game script, I mean either leading by a lot of points or losing by quite a few points out there, Kareem Hunt becomes your number 1 running back. And there's a couple of reasons why. First off, if they're leading by a bunch, he's the better runner between the tackles, is much more powerful. And when you're running those inside dives and so on and so forth, he's a lot more efficient than a Jerome Ford. So you see him playing at the end of games trying to run out the clock. So if the Browns, right, you're expecting them to go out there and boat race the Jets, that's certainly a script that you can play tonight. He fits that game script quite well, right? He'll get a lot of that garbage time usage. On the flip side, if the Browns are getting absolutely killed, you're going to also see a lot more Kareem Hunt. He's the better wide receiver between him and Jerome Ford. He also has the more sure hands. He's also the better blocker, and that's the huge part there. He is by far a better blocker than Jerome Ford. So if they end up getting behind the sticks, right, they're playing from, let's say, a 2-touchdown deficit, you'll also see a lot more Kareem Hunt. So if you're going to play some outside game scripts, right, I talked about the 3-3, taking some of these Jets wide receivers as a way to get different. If you're going to go full on the Browns, or maybe even full on the Jets, which would take a set of stones, that's going to be extremely low owned tonight. You could still play Kareem Hunt as a buyback, right? You could use him as your 5-1. That one player is a buyback. You'd use him as a, probably more aptly in a 4-2 Jet stack as one of the 2 players you're taking as a buyback. Kareem Hunt has a lot of utility in the outside game scripts, and I don't think a lot of people consider that. I think a lot of people know about the fact that he's the more powerful back, right? If they're playing from way ahead, he's going to get extra usage. But I don't think a lot of people consider the game scripts where they're playing from behind, right? And I know the Jets, our whole touchdown underdogs tonight, we've seen crazier things happen. We've seen worse teams go out there and beat better teams before, so don't be completely mind blown if that were to happen. And in fact, I'm still going to build a few lineups tonight that are 4-2 Jet stacks, just in case we get that kind of outcome. And Kareem Hunt is going to be one of the top of the players for a buyback in that kind of scenario. We'll go back up, touch on some of these middle tier spend up options that you can take. We talked about Garrett Wilson. I think he's an excellent play. Same thing with Joe Flacco, right? He's worth all the ownership he's getting. But once again, he's your highest owned player on the slate. So you're going to have to differentiate elsewhere. Trevor Siemian, a little bit lower owned. Siemian, maybe not the most flashy passer by any means, but more than serviceable. And at $8,800, you really aren't asking for all that much from him. So I think that he's, especially at just 32.5% ownership, I think that he's an excellent play. In fact, he's one of the better plays on the slate if we end up getting that low ownership number. Jerome Ford's okay. He's not my favorite play, right? We already mentioned, I think Kareem Hunt, maybe even a better play than Ford. Also worth noting that the touchdown discrepancy, right? Ford has, I think it's like 6 touchdowns on the year. Kareem Hunt in less usage, right? Less touches, less games, right? Because he got brought into the team after Chubb got hurt, has more touchdowns, right? So if you're playing this lower scoring script, right, you're only assuming maybe 1 touchdown between these 2 running backs. Hunt's the guy I'd be expecting to get into the end zone, not so much a Jerome Ford. So maybe that's why I'm a little bit higher on Kareem Hunt than I am on somebody like a Jerome Ford. David Njoku's been on an absolute tear, a little bit chalky though. Same thing with Elijah Moore. Maybe not as chalky, but still at $6,600, considering the kind of stats that he's been putting up, that's expensive, right? And you can see that with the points per dollar, right? One of the lower efficiency plays that we have in this entire range here. And then you get down to this value tier. And honestly, from somebody like an Elijah Moore down to somebody like an Xavier Gibson, right? It's about a $3,000 price difference. It is a massive difference in your points projection. I mean, you're talking about 8.1 points, which isn't all that great, right, for Elijah Moore. Maybe a better comparison would be like David Njoku going from a 12-point projection going the whole way down here to a 4.2-point projection. So this range here, in terms of your points per dollar value is not great. I mean, Allen Lazard's a 1x value. Xavier Gibson here, right, 1.3x value. That's why they're low owned, right? That's why they're the leverage plays you can get to, because you're spending too much salary, right? And there's a time and place to get to these sort of players. If they go out you, they get you that splash play. Allen Lazard, right? Big body target, somebody that can go out there and high point the football. If he scores a touchdown, right, that's getting him to the optimal lineup. So just know that you're going to be taking a hit in terms of your projection right down here in this range, but it is where you're going to get all the leverage that you're looking for. And in terms of pure punts, like Pierre Strong, third string running back for the Browns, maybe one of the top two guys gets hurt, right? That's his avenue to success. Israel Abanikanda was the number 2 running back for the Jets last week. I know that because I bet against Dalvin Cook. I took his under on rushing yards, and he had 0 touches last week. I think his only touch in the game was actually as a Wildcat quarterback and ended up fumbling the ball, giving it to Xavier Gibson, I believe, on an end around. So not pretty out there for Dalvin Cook when he played. But if Abanikanda is going to be healthy and play this week, he is still technically questionable as of right now. He's probably going to be your number 2 running back again. So Dalvin Cook, I am looking for some sort of leverage plays down here. It's probably Abanikanda this week because Dalvin Cook, like I said, had 0 touches last week. Literally had 0 fantasy points. Actually, I think he had -1 because of the fumble, which is just really bad week. Let's just say that much for Dalvin Cook. And then guys like David Bell aren't going to play very much. He only played in garbage time last week. Harrison Bryant doesn't play very much more for the Cleveland Browns. And Jordan Adkins, he played quite a bit last week. And the only reason I know that is that because I bet on David Njoku for a prop. And I was a little bit tilted that Adkins was getting all the usage. By the end of the game, right, Njoku had like 44 yards, so he started to get more of that usage. But early on, especially on the running downs, Atkins was in there as the blocking tight end. So if you're looking for that backup tight end touchdown, right, a pure punt play down here at $800, Atkins is not the worst idea. Now, he's not the best play in human history, right? He's technically the tight end 3 out there for the Browns, but because of how much of a better blocker he is than a lot of the other guys on the team, you see him play snaps. And somebody that's playing snaps in a showdown format always at least has a little bit of upside to bring. And now for some prop exposure. So over here on Underdog, 2 props that I like taking and honestly still pretty solid value at this point. So Kareem Hunt was just bumped up to 27.5. It looks like he got bumped down momentarily back to 26.5. And whether it's at 26.5 or by the time you're watching this, if it is bumped back up to 27.5, I like the over at either number. I got him at 26.5, but I would take him the whole way up to 30 yards because he first off has gotten 7+ carries the last 12 games. And the only games that he didn't have 7+ carries this year were in games that he was coming just off the couch, right? His first 2 games of the year, he had 5 carries after being signed when Chubb went down. And then after that, he's had games of 12, 14 carries out there, but every game he's had at least 7. And this Jets defense, for as good as they are against the passing attack, have not been very good against opposing rushing attacks. And a lot of that is because of game script, right? Teams getting ahead against the Jets and pounding out the clock against them. They average, at least just with running backs, this is not including, wide receiver runs, quarterback runs, anything like that, 25 carries per game to opposing running backs and over 110 rushing yards per game. And while there's still 2 running backs for the Browns, right, we've got Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt. If we're giving Kareem Hunt at least 7 carries, they're averaging about 4.5 yards per carry against the Jets. That's a 30-yard projection right there. And personally, I have Kareem Hunt closer to 10, 11 carries, right? So I have his projection in the high 30s, if not low 40s when it comes to rushing yards. So per my projections, which aren't perfect, but they are what I do most of my analysis off of, this is a solid 15 yards too low. And over there in Sportsbooks, he's at 27.5 on Pinnacle. He was slightly juiced towards the over on Draftkings. And you're starting to see this prop kind of tick up a little bit. I think it's because people are catching on to the line. I mean, like I said, it's a solid 15 yards too low compared to my projections. So I like the over there. I also plan on taking some exposure on his anytime touchdown prop, which is at plus 240 on Hard Rock Bet. On Hard Rock Bet, I believe it's like a solid 50 points, maybe even 60 points higher than what you have at the rest of the industry. I know sites like DraftKings, FanDuel had him at like plus 185, plus 195. That seems fair for a Kareem Hunt anytime touchdown, but he does have 8 touchdowns this year, and I believe a 12-game sample size. And again, that was including the first 2 games where he hardly even got out there and played, right? So he's got 8 touchdowns, I believe in like 10 or 11 full games on the season. So he's scored in like 70-80% of his games. And he's going against a defense that allows over a touchdown per game to opposing running backs between rushing and receiving touchdowns. So obviously for any time touchdown, that's just fine, right? If they're averaging a touchdown per game. And if the Browns get down in the red zone, you see this almost every single time. Kareem Hunt is your red zone running back. So love that prop. Love the anytime touchdown prop out there as well, especially if you can get the plus 240 odds that you can over there on Hard Rock Bet. And then this over on Jordan Whitehead, I like. It's minus 130 on DraftKings. I believe it's minus 133 over there on Caesars in William Hill. He's a player that gets a lot of tackles in the secondary. So if they're going against that Flacco passing attack, right, should see quite a few tackle opportunities. But he's also pretty solid in the run stuffing department, right? He's not somebody that's going to get a bunch of rushing tackles, but if they break into the secondary at all, he is one of the better tacklers in the league. And you've seen that with his tackle numbers, averaging right around 6 tackles per game. That's including assist as well. I'm out there with that metric. And against a team that they're, the underdog, right? The Browns should have the ball more as touchdown favorites. Jordan Whitehead should see even more tackling opportunities. So I like that for him. I like the fact that he's an aggressive tackler, right? Averages well over this number. And then when you consider that the game script should give him even more opportunities to make those tackles, you gotta like this spot quite a bit. So again, you got the minus 130 juice working in your direction, and then this Kareem Hunt prop that I think is one of the bigger misprices on the slate. Over on Prize Picks, I am taking the same Jordan Whitehead prop. Was planning on taking an over on Elijah Moore receiving yards, but that was ripped off literally as soon as I pressed record. So went ahead, did a little bit of an audible for you guys, and threw in this over on Kareem Hunt's rushing plus receiving yards. Of course, guys, I like the rushing yard prop just a little bit more, but because Kareem Hunt does also involve himself with the passing offense quite a bit, I like this over as well. It's not the worst piece of value that you can take. Of course, I prefer that other prop, the Elijah Moore over, but hey, if that's not reposted by the time you guys are watching this, feel free to go ahead and take this Kareem Hunt prop. Just for full transparency, it was an over on Elijah Moore at 31.5 yards. So if that ends up getting reposted, feel free to go ahead and add that for a little bit of exposure. But that one was at 32.5 on books, was also minus 130 towards the over. So that's probably why it got ripped off, right? You had the 1 yard discrepancy and a lot of sportsbook juice there. So if it doesn't get reposted, maybe it's posted at like 33 yards or something like that. Feel free to go ahead and take this spot as a replacement. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Smash that like button before you hopping out of here, and also comment down below who you've got as your top captain play on the slate. You can go ahead, guess the top captain, the one that wins the large field GPP this week. I'll go ahead and give you guys a free month of my Patreon page. On there, of course, is where you can get uncensored access to all the projections that I post, my player pool for Showdown, all the different prop exposure that I'm taking, right? Not just the few props that we touch on the video here. And to go out there, use all those resources for your process, and you can win a free month of that if you go out there and guess the correct captain. So go ahead, guess down below. Also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll have a video coming out for the Saturday Showdown slate, right? We've got Lions Cowboys there, so that should be an absolute banger, and then content coming for the main slate on Sunday. So keep an eye out for all of that. Again, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of it when it drops, and best of luck tonight with all those lineups, any of those prop slips that you're entering, and let's go out there and get ourselves into the green.